princess lurks a many-backed beast. That's in the club toilets, love.
Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the biggest freak of all?
This is a scene from George's hit musical Taboo. Backstage, I first asked him how everyone got on now and if there were still tensions within the band.
The thing about Culture Club is that it's one of those things, whenever I do a tour with them, particularly the last tour where we went to kind of Asia and, sort of America, and it was quite a long haul. At the end of it, I was like, never again. And I think we sort of had that really. We never really kind of officially split up. We kind of just drifted away. That sort of bands like the Wham or the Jam. In fact, it rhymes. It's fantastic. Wham or the Jam. Thank you, ma'am. They sort of officially split up, whereas we kind of just drifted apart, which sort of always left the door open for us to kind of come back and do things together. And in a kind of sort of weird way, I feel that, although I can do stuff on my own now, and there's a lot more freedom in being a solo artist, and I can get away with more, I can be more outrageous, I can be more provocative, I can be more outspoken about my sexuality. Obviously, if you're in a band, you are slightly restricted by two heterosexuals and one inverted commas. But I do feel a kind of sort of loyalty towards the band, because I do feel that without them and without the experiences that I had with them, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now. If you work with people and you've kind of, when you're in a band, you kind of grow up in public, you grow up in front of people. So there is a kind of loyalty and there is a kind of mutual respect. And yes, you hate each other and you love each other. And it's kind of, how would I describe it best? I think it's a bit like going home for Christmas to the family. The arguments about what you're going to watch, Top the Pops or the Queen's Speech. I always go for the Queen's Speech myself. I just feel that, it's nice to sort of have a break from it and come back to it.
So how difficult is it to keep a profile in today's music business as opposed to past decades?
I think a lot of it is, I think that, one of the wonderful things about sort of early 80s kind of music, and I think the 70s particularly was great because it was such an eclectic time for music. You had kind of sort of the dinosaur rock bands, then you had kind of punk hijacking that, then you had kind of Michael Jackson in front of a lyrics curtain singing Rock With You, then you had disco, and you had like the Sex Pistols and the Good Bay Dance Band, and you had reggae. It was just such a mad time for music, and I think that's kind of influenced what I do. And it's also hindered what I do as a musician, because I think that people don't really know where to put me. It's like, are you a DJ? Are you a hippie? Or are you a dance artist? Or what are you? And I just, if I go back to when I was sort of buying Bowie albums when I was 13, every time Bowie released an album, I would be sort of horrified. When I bought Station to Station or Diamond Dogs, I'd think, oh, what's he doing? What's he doing? And then within a week, it would be my favourite record. And I think that kind of whole idea of kind of respecting people for challenging themselves musically, for taking risks with their careers, is no longer respected. And I think you're required in this day and age to kind of keep almost repeating yourself. And I think it's one of the only art forms. Sculptors have a style or painters have a style, but you don't do the same painting every time you do a painting or a sculpture. Henry Moore might have a style, but, it's kind of expanded on. Whereas I think what's happened to pop music is it's almost become so formulaic and so sort of almost like it's the sort of cultural equivalent of sort of beef, sort of pre-packed. So you don't sort of have to think about this poor grass-eating animal, vegetarian animal that you're actually stuffing in your face. I think that's a good answer. I'm pleased with that.
So what do you put the success of Culture Club down to?
I think it's all about timing. A lot of people have asked me in the last kind of few, 10 years, whether, and especially a lot recently, whether I think I would have been, or the band would have been successful had we started now. And maybe not, maybe people wouldn't be ready for that, And I also think that ideas now, because of the information age, are kind of consumed at an alarming rate. So anything that sort of new happens gets swallowed almost immediately. So imagine if punk happened now, it would be in a B&Q advert within 2 weeks. So it kind of takes away the kind of impetus and the kind of power of that music, which is kind of what happened to drum and bass or jungle, whatever you want to call it, and to a lot of dance music. And I think that we had that luxury of being able to be a kind of, sort of best kept secret. We used to set up our own gigs a long time, before we got signed, we were actually sort of going around the country. I remember going to sort of, Birmingham in a black taxi cab that John had borrowed from a friend with all the equipment for the show, and doing a sort of a gig at, it was a famous footballer, I can't remember his name now, he played for some football club in Birmingham, but it was this club called the Holy City Zoo, and we sort of did a gig there, and then we sort of packed it up afterwards, and and in those days you'd get heckled all the time, you'd be constantly kind of, fighting off the crowd, they'd be shouting names at you, faggot and puff, things that you don't know you are. It's been a surprise to me.
As a teenager, how prepared for success were you, and what was your family life like?
I think I was brought up with a very strong work ethic. When I lived at home, we were never allowed to sign on the dole. That was absolutely forbidden. So if you took a job, which I had a lot of jobs, I worked in a fruit factory, or hat shop. I never lasted very long in any job because I always had a problem with authority. So if I did walk out of a job, the next morning I would be frog marched, literally, to the job office. It was a case of if you're going to live in this house, you will work and you will pay, your way. I mean, you always kind of borrowed the money back off your mother, when you're out to the discotheque, but it was just the idea that you worked, and I think that's probably where that comes from.
Now, what were the main influences that made you want to sing and perform?
Well, I think a lot of it really comes from childhood, sort of growing up in a sort of suburban place where you felt that you weren't part of the kind of mainstream, sort of kids have this kind of unnerving ability to kind of poke you where it hurts. Do you know you look like Brian Ferry? Anyway, a little bit, you've got a bit of a Brian Ferry look about you. But I think what it is that when you're at school and you're sort of 6 years old and I was very effeminate as a kid. I had very long, I had long hair, and a lot of people used to think I was a girl. So I'd be out shopping with my mother, and people say, "Oh, what's your daughter's name?" And I sort of got that all from my childhood, and then I discovered David Bowie, and that sort of was really the beginning of my kind of, oh my God, I'm not alone. There's other people out there. Actually, I think it started before that with Quentin Crisp, seeing The Negative Was Serving, because it was like, my God, there was somebody like that in the 1930s. That was really just like something. I can remember sort of watching that on TV in my parents' house, and slowly everyone in the family kind of leaving the room, and just sort of lying on the floor and just being in absolute ecstasy about this film, and thinking, well, this is fantastic. And so, and then sort of finding out about people like Oscar Wilde or Cecil Beaton, and just all those things. I think there's this kind of fantastic kind of daisy chain of people that have kind of, in their own way, made it possible for me to be who I am. But I don't necessarily think that it changes society, because I think that what happens is that you kind of slightly live in a cultural bubble. I don't think my cultural bubble is quite as big as Elton John's, but it's big enough for me to kind of avoid, living in fear or being chased down the street. And I'm quite tough, I can look after myself. I mean, I'm constantly getting into arguments with people, and I think what's funny about that is that people kind of, because if they see you dressed up and you're sort of in makeup, they're sort of rude to you, they're so shocked that you react in such an aggressive way that they kind of don't quite know what to do. And that was always true of Lee, because Lee was 6'2", and probably 3 times my size in weight, and with sort of platforms and various headdresses, it was quite a sort of formidable thing to be encountered by. And I'd often be in the street with Lee, and people would kind of gangs of kids would come towards you, and they actually didn't know what to do, because it was like, well, what is it? And I think when you can't put a label on something, it's more terrifying. And that's why I loved Lee Barry, because you couldn't kind of actually say, well, you're a punk rocker, or you're a new romantic, or how can you say that to someone with a toilet on their head? It's like, or just like an emu, or covered in spawns. I really should have a thermometer in my mouth right now, but there you go.
Now, how did Culture Club go from global triumph to self-destruction in the 80s?
Well, I think it's just like, it's sort of the great, exploding inevitable, really. All bands, throughout history, if you go, I think the Rolling Stones are probably an exception, but the Beatles, there's so many examples that you could pull out of a hat of groups that, reach a sort of point in their careers and then hate each other because, the singer's getting too much attention. That was obviously a huge problem in culture because my personality was so much larger than everybody else's. And it was always like, well, why don't you interview this person, or why don't you interview Roy or Mikey? And they always wanted to interview me. And because I was kind of going out with John, John kind of got special treatment, so he would always be sort of George and John and Mikey and Roy. And, there were always arguments about that. I remember Roy kind of almost being turned away from this sort of Culture Club party in New York because they didn't know who he was, and they sort of pushed him out of the way, and he was very upset. But I used to see that, and it would upset me as well because I felt for them, but at the same time I didn't feel that it was my fault and I should take responsibility for it. I think you should stand up for yourself.
Now, you must really appreciate how loyal your fans have remained.
Yeah, I think I've been very lucky in that respect. But then I think that, that's how I behave as a human being. And I think if you give, you get back. There are people that, were kind of around in the day and they've grown up and they've got married and they don't come to concerts, and that's fine. That happens to some people. And then you have other people who are kind of incredibly kind of obsessive and, they know what you're doing before you are. They know about your next move before you've even made it, before you've even decided you're going to do it. You get fans sort of coming up to you and saying, "Oh, you're going to Singapore in 3 months." You go, "I am." It's news to me. And then you find out you are. So fans are much more resourceful than we used to be. I was a huge Bowie fan, and I would set aside his house and, go to every gig, but I would never have flown to America.
Your autobiography, Take It Like a Man, is extremely honest and pulls no punches. Did you find it therapeutic writing it all down? And did that lead on to you writing your Sunday newspaper?
No, I think for me I started the book long before it was published. We were doing the last Culture Club album, which was Luxury to Heartache, and I was in Switzerland, I'm bored out of my mind, and there were lots of days when I just wasn't doing anything but waiting for things to be done in the studio. I bought a computer and started writing about school, about how much I hated it and how much I thought that it was kind of like, almost like a prison sentence. I think that I've always had this view that you should go to school till you're like 14 and then work for a while, then go back for a while, and then leave. I think that you need to be out in the real world, and I also think that one of the things they should add to the curriculum is emotional intelligence, especially for the teachers, because sometimes they were worse than the other kids, people like gym teachers who would be such bullies and make your life hell. I hate exercise, except if it's verbal.
Which of your records are you particularly proud of?
You mean Culture Club records? Yeah. I think probably Victims and That's the Way are my favourite Culture Club songs because they're very simple but they're very personal. And I think one of the sort of most amusing things about our success is that when Virgin wanted to release Do You Really Want to Hurt Me as a single, I kind of marched in there and said, this can't come out as a record, it's too personal and people won't get it and it's too long, and I was like, if you put this out, I'm leaving the band. What a fool that was. And I remember sitting on the stairs kind of being really angry, and they were like, well, we're putting it out, and that's the end of it. And I was like, well, it's going to be, a disaster and no one's going to buy it. And I was so wrong. And that was kind of like a form of discovery for me, because it was like, so being really personal is what it's about. And so as I've got older, I've kind of worked more and more towards being, sometimes I think probably a little too personal. But, back in the day, in the show we did this bit where I'm recording one of the first songs that we ever wrote, which was called The Eyes of Medusa, and I was using the word he. So I was going, he loves me, he hates me. And the engineer actually did stop me and say, do you realise you're singing he? And I was like, yeah. Because I didn't realise that it was an issue. And the rest of the band were like, well, if you sing he, people are going to be a bit freaked out by it. So everything became kind of ambiguous. And I think I've reached the point now, particularly in my own work, and also with some of the stuff I've done with Culture Club, where I sing about things that are actually real and part of my life. I'm not going to do a Will Young and kind of sing about some imaginary female whilst, claiming to be openly gay. I'm 1 in 10, isn't it? Apparently. Well, I think everybody's queer. But that's just me. Call me
But
old-fashioned.
what do you remember about the beginnings of Culture Club?
Mikey, in a way, kind of started the band. Mikey was the sort of beginning of Culture Club. Mikey had seen me in a magazine. I'd been in Bow Wow Wow for really the blink of an eye. It was like 3 months or something. And Malcolm had kind of set up this photo of me and Annabella, and it was in the NME, and it said I'd been fired. And at that point, I was called Lieutenant Lush. And Mikey saw this picture, thought I looked kind of interesting. And came to, I was DJing at this club called Planets, and he sort of came up to me and said, I saw you in a paper, can you sing? And I was like, well, yeah, people have said I can sing okay, And he said, would you want to be in a band with me? And I was like, well, I've never really thought about it, but okay. We exchanged numbers, and that's really how it started. And John was kind of, John had been in bands, and I'd also met John before, sort of accidentally. I'd seen him around. And suddenly it was like, I was calling John up and saying, oh, do you want to be in this band? I've been chucked out of Bow Wow Wow for being too effeminate. Malcolm thought, thinks I'm going to be a drag queen and end up at the Vauxhall Tavern. And I remember saying to John, do you have a drum kit? And he was like, yes, I'm a drummer. And I just felt such an idiot afterwards. But that's kind of how we started. And then we found Roy. And we kind of, he'll hate me for saying this, we only chose him because he had a good haircut. He was a good player, but it was mainly his hair that kind of got him the job. He had a great quiff in those days.
So, George, any musical ambitions left to fulfil?
I think that you're never satisfied as an artist. You always think that, your greatest song is still lurking somewhere in your loins. You think, I think it's just, I think a lot of it's timing, and I think also, the problem with Britain as a kind of pop culture is that they're not the audience. The audience are incredibly loyal. They're fantastically supportive. And, the fact that I just recently got voted one of the top 100 Britons was like, well, why don't you buy my records then? And the reason they don't buy my records is because no one ever hears them, because they get played anywhere. So obviously people have to hear things. And I think you're up against so much, very high-handed kind of marketing from record companies. You've got the sort of boy band thing and the sort of Disney, and you have that thing in America where everything's kind of cross-collateralized, and it's the movie and the advert for Pepsi, and we were never that cheap. We just always said no to everything. We were asked to kind of, last year we were asked if they'd let us use this Karma Chameleon for Burger King, and I'm vegetarian, so go figure. The band wants to, but I was like, no way.
Well, all the best for the future, and thank you, George.
Thank you.
It must be pleasing to know after all these years you can still create enough interest to fill the Albert Hall.
Yeah, well, I think we can fill more than the Albert Hall, probably. It's funny, when I was driving up here to this interview today, this builder went, oh, it's Jon Moss, oh, mate, how are you? And it's like I get recognised all the time, which isn't bad for 45, I think the thing is that George used to worry about the Culture Club being an 80s revival band. And it's not like that. I mean, Culture Club it's a totally unique thing. And that's what a lot of the reviews actually, it was very exciting reading the reviews from the Albert Hall, which is quite a mixed show. But they were saying that Culture Club used to be, what's the word? They used to be rebellious in a way. They used to look rebellious, whatever the word is. But now they just look surreal. And they actually said you don't think of the 80s because the songs sound as if they're brand new now. I mean, that's what's weird, because I played those songs so many times, and I enjoy playing them. Every time we play them, I enjoy it. Unless we've been on tour for 3 months in America, which you don't like anything other than that. But every time we play those songs, it's like playing them for the first time.
What do you think the appeal is of playing the Albert Hall?
I don't know, really. Well, it's got a sort of cachet, hasn't it? When I say to people we're playing the Albert Hall, they go, wow. I mean, it's quite nice if you do a one-off gig. It's an event at the Albert Hall. If you were doing the sort of Dominion or something, it wouldn't be quite the same. But the only trouble with the Albert Hall is that if you have seats right up the top, I mean, so my family solicitor came with his family, and I got a phone call backstage saying he thanks for the seats, but he can't have them as he gets vertigo. So I don't know if you ever sat at the top of the Albert Hall. So, but it's a nice event. It's a nice place to go. It's nice.
So, what do you think the big attraction of Culture Club is after 20 years?
What, for me or for no, for everybody?
For the public, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I got friends who've got children my age of my children who are 5 years old, and they love Culture Club. They sing the songs. I know, on my amazement, I know 16-year-old, 17-year-old kids who've never heard of Culture Club, but they say, "Oh, I saw you on telly, and I bought your record, and it's great." And this is an old record, not like a modern record, not with a modern production on it or anything like that. Although, so it does seem to. I mean, I think the thing about Culture Club is that it's so eclectic. The band's so eclectic. I mean, they've got Karma Chameleon, which does drive us mad, but it's such a great song. Though it is a great song, but it does drive you mad because it is like a sort of a nursery rhyme in a way. And then you've got the reggae, and then you've got some quite sort of dark stuff, and you've got Victims. So it's a very eclectic musically. And so it does go right across the board.
Do you still have the same enjoyment and enthusiasm for playing?
Oh yeah,
You like it?
I love performing. I miss it. I mean, I can't really do anything else. That's the trouble. I mean, I write, and I do a bit of, I have, let's do other things for money, financial things, a bit of property stuff like that, only a bit. But unfortunately, I mean, well, not unfortunately, but the only thing I love doing is playing. I mean, honestly, really, if I don't play, I do get very depressed. I do. It's like there's a hole in my life. I don't care what's going on, as long as I'm playing live.
Yeah.
It can be in a club or anything. Playing drums specifically.
Now, was it true you started your musical career as a punk?
No, I didn't start as a punk. I actually, what happened, I was brought up in the 70s, and I was brought up in sort of Slade and the Bay City Rollers and stuff like that, but also with progressive rock, which was all right, but then you got the other stuff when it started going to the sort of jazz funk thing. So I actually started by going to auditions with a Ringo kit, a 3-piece drum kit, and not even getting an audition because I didn't have 17 drums. They used to watch me set them up and go, "Where's the rest?" As a consequence of that, because I couldn't stand that attitude, when punk came along, first of all, like everybody else, I said, "This is really horrible." But suddenly, you realise it gave you an opportunity to play. It was great, and people just said, "Come in, yeah, fine." It was minimal. So, yeah, after all that, I was a punk. I started with the Clash.
You were responsible for putting Culture Club together. How did you first meet George?
Well, funny enough, actually, George had met Mikey first, and I had been around George for quite a long time due to the punk scene. There's quite a small scene in London, and George had seen me, and I said, the only thing about George, I've seen him a lot of times, but he looked completely different. Every time, one time he had a blue and yellow face, and another time he was dressed as a nun, and you had to meet him 4 times to realise it was the same person, basically. Master of disguise. I knew Kirk, and I lived in a squat in Totteridge where I had a band, and Kirk came up one day and sang there, and there was a guy called Terry Razor. I don't know his real name.
Terry Razor.
Scottish boy, Terry Razor. His name was. I think actually was his real name. Anyway, as it transpired, I knew Malcolm McLaren, and Malcolm McLaren wanted to have George as Lieutenant Lush and kick out whatever her name was. Sorry, can't remember. And I got a call from Terry Razor saying that George was forming his own band, and that's how we got together. And when I went down to this rehearsal studio in Borough, he was there with Mikey, and there was a guy called Suede, a guitarist, who was a lovely bloke. Sorry.
And how did the rehearsals go? That first rehearsal, did you feel that there was definitely something here?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, in a normal situation, I walked in and walked straight out again because it was hideous. It was in this old sort of costume place, and it was not. I mean, I'm not really into that sort of faded sort of backstage theatre thing. It's not my scene. Victorian dolls and that. If you know what I mean. The smell of the grease paint I don't like. So the place was a bit spooked me out a bit. And then George was there, and he just had. I mean, I just knew straight away. There was nothing there. I mean, to be honest with you, they had one song called Mask or something. I mean, there was nothing there. I mean, it wasn't like what a great band, what great music, but it was just George. I mean, George was,
So the chemistry just felt right.
Definitely. I mean, you know when you know you're in the presence of a star.
Yeah.
I mean, you could be in the presence of a nutcase, but there's George is both, obviously, but it's very rarely that you're in the presence of someone. I mean, having been in bands and known, do you know what I mean? You be around people, you just know, and as you see people like make it, you just know. And with George, he just had. And he's still got it. I mean, he's just got that. He just had that charisma. But then he had that charisma, and I don't know why. It's just there was something there.
Now, when you arrived on the music scene in the early 80s, you seemed confident in knowing exactly how to promote yourselves. I mean, how did you know that at such an early age?
Well, I don't know really. I mean, I'd done I did my A-levels at school very, very early because it was when my birthday is. And I didn't go to university, and I went out, and the first job I got was in the Marquee Recording Studios. I wrote about 300 letters. I don't know what I know I wanted to play, but so having been through that, and then been through a few bands and had contracts, the penny sort of dropped quite quickly, and I knew what I wanted to do. I was like pop music mixed with everything else. Where at the time, most people were still saying that they wouldn't sacrifice their music for commerciality, and there's all that rubbish, basically. And I really actually just said, look, anybody want to form a band where we can play reggae and where we can play any music we want? And that seemed to happen with Culture Club. And I mean, George was obviously responsible for the image. I mean, George was he was our secret weapon. But he did want to call himself Papa George originally, which is not good. And then he had extensions put in, and I got him the hat, which is actually a Hasidic Jewish hat from Belmondo Hats in Temple Fortune.
So it was your idea for the hat?
It was my idea for the hat, yes. I created him. I made him Jewish.
Which of the Culture Club singles do you think have endured the best musically?
What, in the public eye?
Yeah.
Probably Karma Chameleon.
Karma Chameleon.
But it's funny though, because you meet people, I mean, the ones, Victims, even though it wasn't a #1 hit, but Victims is a really, really popular one. Church of the Poison Mind. Do you really want to? I mean, really, basically, most of the sort of the big hits, but I would say Karma Chameleon is probably the one that won't go away, thank God.
But which of the records are you particularly proud of?
I think Just Want to Be Loved, which was the last hit we had recently, which I think is a great record. Victims is a great record. Do You Really is a great record. I mean, Karma Chameleon is a great record. I don't know really. I mean, I really like Church of the Poison Mind because I always wanted to do it. That was quite authentic Motown. I mean, it's not quite as I would have wanted it to be. I would have liked it to be a bit harder, but I think probably.
How much input did you have with the actual recording process?
Well, when we started, the others weren't too familiar with actual recording. I think Mikey was, but I mean Roy was as well, but they weren't too familiar because they're younger than me. They hadn't done it, but I had obviously worked in the studio, and also it was the time when the drum machines were just starting. So being a drummer, I looked at it and I thought, I've got to learn to use this, but incorporate the two. So that made me very involved. Plus, I used a lot of percussion. So normally, I mean, being a drummer, sometimes people say you just go in and you play and that's it. But I was a lot more involved in that because of the music. It was, like I said, eclectic, and the rhythms are very important to it. Plus the fact that when Steve Levine finished the first Do You Really Want to Hurt Me, I wasn't pleased with it. And then he realised he wasn't pleased with it either. So that's when I would come in and help him mix at the end. It wasn't. I mean, I did it, but I got pushed out at the end. It always happens.
How did it feel having that sort of first flush of success, knowing that you'd actually made it?
Great. For me, I mean, I'm sure for everybody it's fantastic, but for me it was great because my parents were very worried. My father was saying, yeah, what are you doing this for? You never make it, and you're crap, basically. And if your grandfather was alive, and it's a typical sort of Jewish family background, if your grandfather had known what you were doing, I say to my peers, so what do you want to do? So I want to be a musician. They go, are you going to play bar mitzvahs? Are you going to, do you get a lot of engagements? I go, yeah, it's all right. So for that, but my dad was brilliant because when we actually did it, I'm just great fit, brilliant. The Son's on our #1 record, albeit like, oh dear.
How did Culture Club go from global triumph to self-destruction in the 80s?
It shouldn't have happened. I think basically, I mean, with George, I don't know what happened really. I mean, obviously, we didn't really. I mean, we fell out, but I think we fell out definitely as a consequence of what was going on. I mean, drugs, but I don't think the drugs came first with George. I think that George had a lot of people around him who. I mean, he's very creative, George. He does like to change. And I don't think if George feels like he's tied down, whether it's financially sensible or whatever it is, that doesn't matter to him. And I think a lot of people around him saying, oh, you're the gay thing, like you should tell everybody you're gay, and you should, really having, sticking the knife in. And I think they were very jealous, and they were saying to him, well, nobody takes you seriously. You're a puppet. You're this. You're that. And I think that George was clever enough to have dealt with that. He's not stupid, but I think that had a lot to do with it. I know what George is saying. In fact, I know that had a lot to do with it. There are people that's, in that's a Queenie community, you know what I mean? There's a lot of people that, they're not really pleased, I don't think. I'm being honest, I don't think they're that pleased when you are successful. And I think a lot of people try to pull him down. Now, I saw that. But I think especially with me and George being together, and staying in one room together, and then Mikey and Roy, so it became not against each other, but it become, I think after a while, they became distant from me and George. I mean, when I was becoming distant from George because it was getting difficult. And I think the band started to, individually started to go separate ways, not musically, but I think it was a very dynamic thing. I mean, all bands are like that, but you've got to remember, you're not talking about four heterosexual guys, you know what I mean? Yeah. To four sort of blokes all going to have a punch up. And, obviously with George and me and Roy and Mike, and they were different as well. They're not your average sort of like rocker type guys, Well, Roy was actually, but and I think really that the pressures. And also, none of the other guys have been in bands. You see, I've been in bands. I've done it. I toured before, and I don't think they really understood it. I think it was a shock. It must have been.
Was it musically difficult to all pull in the same direction?
It got difficult because I'm not quite sure what George wanted to do. He went to New York and he started to get sort of slightly weird. He was ahead of the game in one way, but not. And again, it's that thing where I think we started to lose the eclecticism of the band. I think everybody started to take themselves too seriously.
That's a general thing, though, with any band, isn't it? I suppose.
Well, yeah, generally, the more expensive the album, the less successful the band is becoming.
So, was it true that you actually went 10 years without speaking to each other?
With George? I don't know if it was 10 years, but I mean... No, but not very often. See, the thing was, with George, what I find strange now, I mean, we get on, well, it's up to him. I get on with him, and I've taken a lot of stick off him for whether he thinks he's right or not. As you know, it's like a very tolerant, peaceful man. Easygoing, but I mean, I did speak to George. But I mean, for example, I started doing a track when I was living in St John's Wood. I had a studio there, and he said, "I want to come over and do something. I've got a great idea." Okay, he came over with Helen Terry. I'm a little 8-track going to the studio, fantastic. He said, "Oh, fuck, I'm going. I don't know, in the evening or something," and that was it. I've got to phone him and stuff, And 3 months later, he said, "I'm coming round to finish that track off." I said, "What, George, hold on a minute." I said, "Which track?" "Oh, right." So listen, give me a couple of hours to get all... No, that's fuck you. I can say, fuck you, no. If you don't want to do it, I don't want to work with you again, slam. And it was difficult. It was difficult. So 3 months later, sort of, hi, I'm outside,
Right, yeah. But those tensions, do you think creatively that can be a good thing?
No.
You don't?
No, I don't agree.
Destructive?
Yeah, it's destructive. Mm-hmm. It's destructive. Because, I mean, the main reason I find it's destructive because, I mean, for whatever our gripes with each other, I don't really understand what was wanted of me. I mean, you have a relationship's finished. I mean, that's the way it goes. But you can't seriously hold a grudge against someone for that. Well, I suppose you can, but I don't know whether I think it's just the way George is. He's just that kind of person, And I'm not treated any worse than some other people. So,
But was it difficult having a relationship with somebody in the band when there's 4 people in the band?
No, not really. At first, I mean, it was wonderful. It was wonderful. I mean, because it was like a sort of fairy tale love affair, if you like. I mean, you can imagine, it's like starting a business with your wife or lover or husband, whatever it is, So no, it wasn't. It was great, but it did get claustrophobic because I mean, the thing about George is he found it hard to go out. But the wonderful thing about some people when they wear a lot of makeup and they dress up is if they don't wear their makeup and they go out, the chances are they will not be recognised. So there are ways around it. I think George decided to go out in full regalia. I mean, it's not surprising. You can't go into McDonald's in full regalia. Can't do it.
I like a quote that's been attributed to you, where you say Culture Club feels like a box that you put in the attic and take back down again when needed. Is that how it feels?
Well, not really. I mean, I love Culture Club. I love Culture Club. I mean, nothing I've done musically has been as successful as Culture Club, which is fair enough. But I think it'd be pretty good if I had done. But if I just did something else in whatever region it was, I mean, I've had success in other things, but it was very successful. I'd still love Culture Club. That's the thing. Sometimes George thinks that the rest of us want to do it because we just want the money and it's this and that. I mean, of course, you have families and stuff like that, but it's not that. It's when we actually get together now. When we got together and George had another group who he sort of put onto the side of the original group, because he's quite loyal like that. They realised what it was when the 4 of us got together. There was definitely a magic and a charisma there. And you can't replace that with whatever you do. It's nothing to do with money or success or whatever you do, you cannot replace that. So, I mean, I love Culture Club, really. It's my thing. It's like, and I think George does as well, It's like, I know he does, really, I've got a band at the moment called Emoticon, right?
There's that name again.
No, I swear to you, honestly, this band, and I'll tell you what's funny, we've got a gay singer.
Yeah.
Me, right? No, not me, I'm not a gay singer, the drummer, Jewish drummer, gay singer, Jewish drummer, black bass player, and a guitarist, well, he's sort of white with long hair. but black hair, so it's almost sort of replicant of Culture Club. It's not the same at all. Now, this guy, a guy called Steve Swindles, he had a lot of albums out in the 70s. He was a journalist. He ran loads of clubs, and he's just got this amazing. I mean, I've known him for years. It was only about 2 years ago that I actually knew that he was still writing songs and singing. So we just went in and recorded them down in Bristol, massive attack studio. They're very cheap. Straight in, 4 tracks. He'll play them on the piano like that, and we'll just go right, roll the tape, literally like that. I mean, they sound really fresh. So I played them to a few people, and everybody I played them to loves them. I'm playing to friends of mine, kids who are 17, 18. They go, "Yeah, I really like it. It's great." You know. I've had a few bands like that. This one is great. It could do really well, but you know, he's 50, I'm 45, so
Who knows?
who knows? But you can't stop giving up. And the thing is, I can't stop. What am I going to do? I can't stop doing that. You've got to keep making music.
That's great. Well, all the best for the future, and thank you, John.
Thank you very much indeed.